My name is Daniel Phillips, CEO here at Industry IoT, and my guest today is Benjamin Bargetzi, who is a business transformation and digitalization expert, currently working for Google, previously worked at Amazon. Benjamin, great to have you with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about how neuroscience meets digital transformation. Quite an interesting and fascinating topic, actually. But before we do that, for those of our listeners who do not know you, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I think you can answer this question like in two steps, right? One is like the professional aspect, and one is like the passion aspect, which
absolutely
hopefully often should overlap. So I would say just the one sentence summary of myself is I'm a tech enthusiast / nerd who has great ambition for bringing good to the world with technology. And so that's the reason why I joined the tech company quite early on. Been working in Google in partnerships. So I'm a senior key account manager working with some of the biggest clients of Google's in Switzerland on digital transformation projects. Previously at Amazon, I did digital transformation within the company, right? And then moved more to the client-facing role at Google, just hoping to have like a lasting impact on the economy with that. And the funny thing is that even though that I have a very tech-heavy career, I'm originally a neuroscientist and psychologist who at some point got bored from looking at brains in the lab and wanted to see real people in real life. And taking a bit the jokes a bit away here, like I think from my background in neuroscience and psychology, I just really developed a strong motivation for how the potential of people, like what people can do if they really try, like how you can, make them happy and everything. And I really think that technology is actually an amazing opportunity here to really help people also and work together. Because often newspapers, you see like man versus machine, you see like these kind of framings. Whereas I really believe it's going to be like a cooperative avenue and a really big potential for the world.
Great, thank you. Super introduction. One of the things that we like to do, Benjamin, before we get into, the topic itself and maybe talk about some of the technical elements, is actually just understand how people in general, but business leaders, how they tick. Do you have a motto, something that you live by, whether it's something in your personal life that translates into business, but something that has served you well?
Yeah, like definitely, actually. Like next to Google, I also have, I'm an independent consultant as well for transformation and a keynote speaker. And one thing I very often mention on stage is my life slogan, which is be fast, fail smart, and dare to think big. And so basically the three components here, I think they're really like my life lessons so far. So being fast just means you have to get ahead of the curve, right? The world is developing faster and faster. New mega trends are showing up. And if you're being slow, you will always like lag behind the market, but never be ahead of it. But then the issue is, of course, if you prioritize speed, you're also prone to make errors, right? And I think that's why being open for failure, and I mean this like in every life domain, like in education, in business, in like your private life, like having an open mindset for the existence of failures, but then learning from them and make sure they do not repeat themselves. I think that's what I call failing smart, which you need to have if you try to be fast all the time. And then the last one, I hope, is kind of self-explanatory, like daring to think big. I think the dare I included here really because thinking big is, everyone tells you to do it, but it's actually, I think it's quite tough. Like really, for example, after my master's, if you have seen my background, I actually directly went for like senior project lead roles in different companies. And actually, I kind of skipped the entry level of it, right? And this is already quite a few years ago. But back then, like having the courage to just think this big and just try to do this, it's kind of like, people call it insane until you succeed. And so I think this is also something, and trust me, many times in my life, I've been dreaming big and then it didn't work out, right? So maybe the safe option would have been the better one. But still, I think it suits my personality. So kind of like, I think being fast, failing smart, and the daring to think big, I think these are the things most important to me.
Yeah, I really like that. It's a little bit of a, a cliche saying, but people often say, you know, the biggest limitations that you create are often the ones in your head, right? The things that you put up barriers in your mind because you think that maybe you're not capable of doing a certain job or being amongst certain people. But actually, you know, like you said, you often putting yourself in a difficult situation or challenging yourself, you see growth in those periods as well, right? And it doesn't always work. Like you say, sometimes you fail, but again, failing is a lesson at the same time as well. And I think dreaming big, you know, it's strange, Benjamin, I have as soon as you walk into my house, I have it's almost like a hanging picture on the wall, and it says dream big. And I just think it's one of those things that if you can, everybody should live by, because it's, you know, if there's anything you can do, you can dream big, right? And I totally agree with that. Cool. So if you were given, and this is a funny question, and I get a different answer every time, right? And I'd be interested to see what you say here, but if you were given one wish to change something, what would you wish for? And this can be applied in the context of your business life, again, in your personal life. There's a hell of a lot going on in the world at the moment, but if you could change, almost like a genie in a lamp scenario, right? What would you wish for?
It's actually, I already thought about this. I would remove all non-beneficial suffering in the world. And I know this is a very philosophically loaded statement, right? So I can go a bit deeper if you want.
Yeah, it's the podcast, the previous podcast, actually, the gentleman said a very, very similar thing to you, spoke a little bit about the war in Ukraine and just about world poverty and suffering. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So basically what I meant by it is, like, I believe a world, like, I think one of the most important things in life is growth and development. I mean, this, you know, I have like a background in like psychology, but then also like, you know, more biological background. And I really believe that if you look at nature, if you look at things, they grow under pressure, right? The problem is if this treasure becomes too big and things, you know, that, like, let's go back to the human level, people really mentally break, or they, you know, they die. I mean, then the growth is kind of like really limited. And so that's why I believe a certain amount of suffering, like reducing all suffering from life or all hardship, that would kind of be like not beneficial for people, because I think a certain challenge is needed. But that's why I said I would really like to remove all the non-beneficial suffering, because there is a certain cutoff after which it just becomes too much for you to really process. And 100%. That's what I would like to see removed.
Yeah, there's a really interesting way of putting it. I think I would resonate with that if I think about, you know, business, and often the times where you feel like things are getting on top of you and they become very stressful and you just can't create any more headspace. Often just the other side of that, something great happens. And that's, you know, most of us have probably experienced that at some stage. So yeah, completely resonate with that. That's cool. So the science of digital transformation, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation with you, actually. What have you learned from neuroscience that can help a manufacturing leader, for example, through digital transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's kind of like one of the things that I do in my keynotes, because for whatever reason, it's like a very niche topic. And just one day I was like, okay, leadership and business is about people, kind of like neuroscience is about people. Why do we not draw more from it? So I think one of the, like, there's a lot of different things you can draw from. I think if I just pick maybe three first. So one is definitely the idea of leadership in general, right? Like, there's a lot of best practices from neuroscience, like how the brain reacts to like certain types of leadership and certain types of, you know, communication and everything. I think one of the most important insights from neuroscience is that there exists like 5 distinct personality factors, like the so-called Big Five model. And depending on what kind of personality type your team has, for example, it's probably a different type of leadership you want to apply. Now, of course, if you work in a manufacturing hall with like thousands of people employed, it's going to be very hard to know all their personalities, right? But at the same time, you work in like hierarchies. So no one is like leading 1,000 people directly. And so I think as long as the number of your direct reports is like overseeable, it makes a lot of sense to invest into getting to know the personalities and maybe how they work best. I think especially in manufacturing, the big challenge, however, is that you have this trade-off of you want to be very standardized, to be efficient, you know, to be fast in how you produce things. But at the same time, you kind of, you know, you also want to make people happy and bring out the best potential in them. So I think especially in those large scale standardized fields, it's a very big challenge of how to, balance these advices from neuroscience and how to bring out the best potential in your employees, which, for example, Google also uses, but then also like, having a certain standardization. But I still think, even though maybe in manufacturing it's less trivial to do so than in other companies, I don't think it means we do need to try at all. And I have a second one if you would like, or you can
sure.
talk about the first
No,
one.
please do.
Cool. So a second one would be definitely, I think, the idea of this of agile methodologies in general. So I think for manufacturing companies, what I've often as a consultant implemented is like a Lean Six Sigma strategy. And I mean, here I just assume the listeners would know what it is. And so here I think the neuroscience teaches us a lot of ways in how we can, review, for example, the way we make our decision making. Like the whole literature on cognitive biases teaches us that the human mind is way more automatic than we would assume that to be, right? And if we have a clear eye for these decision making fallacies that we also as leaders make, I think it can really help us to build proper companies. I can give quick examples of some of those if you would like.
Yeah, please do. This is interesting.
So one, for example, would be sunk cost bias, right? Like in evolution, humans have built up the tendency that if they have already invested a lot in a certain project, they're willing to invest more and more into it because they do not want to admit defeat, right? So we overvalue certain things simply because we have already invested a lot into them. And I think that's something I experience for myself, but also see a lot in business, that people favor certain processes or structures simply because they've already invested a lot. And I think especially in manufacturing, right, where digitalization and IoT can have such fundamental impact, very often you hear the counter like, hey, we have done this and this way for a long time already, or but we already worked so long on this project. And these are not really rational arguments. I understand where they come from, right? But they're emotional arguments and not really rational. And I think like having a clarity as a leader of the own biases that you have, but also that the people around you may have in decision making, can really help you to really make the correct choice, especially in a very fast-paced environment where you do not have that much time to plan for optimization, for example, in supply chain and environments like Amazon.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think organizations can be treated like human bodies? So like a central nervous system versus the rest? And if yes, what does that mean in terms of digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think this is very good. So yes and no. So basically, I think the traditional model where you have the the brain as the center function of the body, and then like the rest moves, I think that is not actually very adjusted to how digital transformation should work, because digital transformation includes a lot of bottom-up involvement of people, like people actually taking part of the process. However, now actually more modern neuroscience research suggests actually that, metaphorically speaking, we have more than one brain. So basically, this idea of embodiment is becoming more and more strong in the literature now, which basically means that to some degree, also your stomach and your fingers and all these things are thinking, in the sense that, for example, if you have stomach ache, right, you will start thinking about, okay, why do I have stomach ache? Is it because I'm nervous? And then you start to feel nervous because you tell yourself those stories. So of course the brain is still the central mechanism of the body, but more and more research now becomes popular that really suggests that this is a two-way street, right? So information flows from the brain to the body, but then also from the body to the brain, and that changes our thinking. And I think if we take this embodiment view on neuroscience, it definitely can be applied to businesses, because what I believe a digital transformation means is that somewhere at the top, probably right from top management, you have to give the first impulses, but then what you really need is feedback loops. Like you need people that experience transformation to give feedback to you, hey, this is not working, or hey, why are we doing things like this? It's the same with agile, right? Like it's a very popular term now to just use Scrum methods, Kanban, or whatever. And I'm also like a big fan of those, and usually consult companies to do those. But if someone has, if a company is, for example, very linear in how they do things, and they have not much collaboration going on, even traditional waterfall methods can actually be successful. And on the discussion of whether Scrum, I just recently worked with Switzerland's leading telecommunication company on restructuring their system from like Scrum to Kanban. They just did Scrum basically because it was very popular, right? But then I think it's also important to listen to feedback of the people who actually experience those systems. Hey, is this actually working for us? And that's why I think digital transformation has a lot to do with these feedback loops where you give impulses top down, but then you're also very open to impulses from bottom up to actually find a model that works for your company, because it must be individual. You cannot just copy paste what other industries and companies do.
Yeah, this is interesting, and I like what you mentioned there around, you know, waterfall based organizations. Do you think, can the plasticity of processes be compared to that of the brain? I.e., how can a traditional, i.e., waterfall based organization foster such plasticity / flexibility, however you want to call it?
Yeah, I think that's the big challenge, right? So I said waterfall can function for certain companies. Like, I don't think we necessarily need to use the agile structures, but the problem is, of course, you sacrifice flexibility if you don't do it, right?
Yeah.
So the problem of the waterfall is like they have very fixed budgets, they have very fixed process lines. So if there's big change happening in the world, you cannot really adjust. And I think that's where, just looking at the brain, neuroplasticity is really impressive, right? So for example, if someone gets blind, right, and cannot see anymore, the other senses become better because the brain simply takes the resources it was using before for the eyes and redistributes them to other sensory channels, which I find incredibly impressive.
Yeah,
and I think a company is able to do that, right? Like if the company's eyes, for whatever reason, stop working, you have to recycle these resources and use them somewhere else. But the more strict and predefined your processes are, I think the less agile you are to actually do this. And in a world where more and more things are changing, be it new developments, but also like global crises that can happen in a largely connected world, I think it's very important that we have this plasticity in our companies to flexibly change with our environments.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to take this in a slightly different direction and talk about people and learning to change, because I think the people element in all of this is super interesting. We can be guilty of talking about technology a lot, and we do within our network and our community, but one of, you know, the conversations that I always find very intriguing is that of people. So what is your perspective on how people can upskill and learn continuously? Can people continuously improve, do you think?
Yeah, I really think so. Yeah, I absolutely believe so. I think there's two factors, I think. One is a growth mindset and one is like openness to change. So there is a so-called, before I mentioned these big 5 personality factors, one of them is openness to new experience. Like those 5 factors, if I want to describe how two people are different, then those 5 factors are psychology's best guess of how to do so. And one key factor is the openness to new experience, which means how much do I struggle when the world around me is changing versus how much am I excited when, you know, new things are happening. And I think so that means certain people by nature maybe have a stronger versus less strong aversion to change. But even for those who are, you know, who are not really liking change that much, there is still, like, I think, the potential to adopt a growth mindset, like saying, hey, who I am today does not limit me in who I can become tomorrow, and therefore I want to improve. But at the end of the day, it's really like purely from a neuroscientific perspective, there's nothing blocking you in developing lifelong. Like neuroplasticity works the entire life, like it never stops. That means the good news is, from a purely like neuro perspective, nothing is stopping you from, you know, developing skills and over time. Of course, certain people maybe in an instrument, they learn it faster than others, or certain people can code, are better at learning coding than others, but everyone can learn everything, just the speed is a bit different. And I think from that perspective, it's really more a question of the growth mindset, which is everyone's individual responsibility, but also definitely the leaders, right? The leaders need to have an example, lead by example with a growth mindset. And I think companies are then really successful when you have this growth mindset spreading across your company. I think that's when huge change is happening.
Yeah. What about in the context of AI and ML? You know, what's the future of learning? Do we really need to know everything? Or, you know, what will be the added value of the human brain as we
Yeah.
kind of progress more and more into this world?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely can't know anything. That's not possible. So I think I have two answers to that. So one is like a science fiction answer, and by science fiction nowadays, I would say an answer for the in 30 years. I think that's the scope of science fiction nowadays. And then the other one is like a here and now answer. So the here and now answer is, I think we have to not overestimate like what AI is currently doing, right? There, it's extremely strong at, adjusting processes, at being precise. Like whenever you have mathematical functions behind something, you're really good at doing it with AI, right? So in manufacturing, I think definitely if you think about sustainability, accuracy, production, it's definitely something where it outperforms humans. But I think that's not really like the question we should be asking ourselves, can AI outperform people in very specific tasks? I think what AI is still struggling to do is like doing complex interconnected tasks, like tasks where you need to pull from various different information bases and kind of connect them. So I think this connective thinking of people, like, really having the overview over different domains and kind of figuring out what's happening, just knowing chunks of what's happening in different fields, I think that's going to be incredibly important, right? That's not where AI is yet. If it's like a very, very specific task, oftentimes, yes, machine learning will beat you over time. But I believe in this world, as I said in the beginning, I believe in this world where, technology and humans grow together. And I think there's a lot of avenues, like, like in the end of the day, let's say the AI, right, generates a model for you or generates tasks, right? But it still needs a human, right, to kind of adjust it with business goals or adjust it with new company directions, with like, with new people in the team. So I do not see this split so much. I think it's more like a hybrid world that we're going towards. But in this hybrid world, we just still need like the readiness to learn of people, right? We need to learn about new technologies. We need to learn about what AI can and cannot do, how we can support the process, how it can support us. So I think it's still, I don't think learning is becoming uncool anytime soon. So I think that's the positive news here.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think process improvement is more a machine thing or a people thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what I was going to with the science fiction thing that I was before. So kind of like, let me just, I will answer your question. Let me just do a little detour quickly. So I think really cool things, that you can think about in the future are something like, you have like human machine brain interfaces, right? Where the machine learning can directly be downloaded in your brain, right? I mean, we're still quite far away, but Elon Musk is heavily investing in this technology, right? I mean, of course, the first use will be like something like you have, medical applications. Someone cannot use their legs. You give them robot legs and link the robot legs to a chip in their brain so they can work properly again, walk properly again. I mean, this is, I think, not so different from how we use with our biological brains, the biological legs, right? On the other hand, if it's about learning, I mean, we already know, right? We use Google search and YouTube and podcasts like yours to learn about the world with technology. So I think this whole intersection of how we learn and think and with technology, it's just slowly becoming closer, because now we use iPhones to check up information, right? We use credit cards, right, to pay our bills. For example, I have a friend who implanted a chip in his hand, like it's inside his flash, and with that he can pay around the world, right? He can pay for machines. Not all of them work as good as others, but I mean, these are just, I think, slow steps that we are now taking where we let technology more and more into our lives. Now, to bring this back to your question, I still think that process design and process improvement is still something where humans are needed, especially as long as humans are involved. What I mean by that is, if you have like a completely automated warehouse or manufacturing site, right, completely automated, then kind of like you just need people maybe to overlook that the AI doesn't make mistakes, but therefore you don't need that many people present, right, to see it. But still, you need people who think about the business, about expansions, optimizations, and things like these, right? Because the AI is only always as good as the data you feed it with or the target you program it with. But then also, like, if you have a process where a lot of people are involved, then of course the AI will have struggled to optimize, what will make these people happy or how can they be the most productive, just because humans are such a fascinating variety of factors that you cannot just predict them that easily, right? I mean, in a science fiction world, yes, you could have an AI that knows better than you yourself know how you could be happy. But I think until we get there, as soon as people are involved, we still need a people element to improve processes, because we need to take care of people's emotion, potential, and the team stability, right? And I think if you just purely AI optimize it, I'm not sure if that would give you the desired outcomes as long as you're working with people.
Interesting. Great answer, by the way. Benjamin, the reason we launched this podcast is so that if somebody listening to one of the conversations can take something that they've learned and make 1% of a difference somewhere, when we're talking about these big, large global organizations, then it's been a conversation worthwhile having. And I think this discussion today, these topics are super interesting and relevant. And, you know, some of the insights and experiences that you've shared have been super valuable. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to jump on and have this conversation with me today. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts or comments that you would like to share with our listeners?
I think just one, like in an era of ever increasing speed of the technological and digital developments and business opportunities, I think it's very key to not forget the human factor. I think that's just the one key message I would give both to the leaders listening to this, but also to employees in general, right? Like, the human factor should not be underestimated. AI has not beaten us yet.
Okay, that's a great note to end on. So Benjamin, thanks again for jumping on and sharing your views and insights with our audience. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit down and have this discussion with you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And everyone, don't forget, be fast, fail smart, and dare to think big. Bye-bye.
There you go. Cheers, Benjamin. Bye-bye.